The shell finally broke. But the first thing the newborn felt was not the warmth of a mother's wing. It was the crushing weight of her shame. Garuda pulled himself from the ruins of the egg. He was a creature of terrifying scale. His wings cast shadows that swallowed mountains. When he opened his beak, the sound rattled the teeth of the beasts hiding in the dark forests below. He was born with the sheer physical strength to tear the crust of the earth apart. But as the dust of his birth settled, he looked down. He saw his mother, Vinata. She was not looking at him. She was on her hands and knees in the dirt. A massive serpent was resting its coiled weight upon her back, sleeping lazily in the sun. This was the inheritance of Kashyap's divided house. Vinata had lost a bitter dispute to her sister Kadru. And in this ancient universe, an oath was not a metaphor. It was a physical binding chain. Vinata had become a slave. She was a living footstool for her sister's children. Garuda looked at the snakes. He could have slaughtered them in a single heartbeat. He could have ground their skulls into the dirt. Instead, he walked to his mother, lowered his massive golden head, and accepted the yoke. The strongest creature ever born had just entered the universe, and his first inheritance was a slave collar. For decades, the sky witnessed an unnatural crime. The great bird flew across the heavens, acting as a ferry for his masters. He carried hundreds of his writhing, hissing cousins on his back. The physical toll was absolute. The serpents mocked him, commanding him to fly higher, driving him into the scorching paths of the sun just to feel the heat on their scales. They cared nothing for his burning feathers, nor did they care for the venom dripping from their fangs, stinging his flesh. They ignored the blood seeping from his exhausted talons as he gripped the empty air. Garuda endured the humiliation because he understood the terrible mechanics of a divine oath. If he crushed the snakes against the mountainside, he would only be killing his cousins. His mother's vow would remain unbroken. She would die in chains. Violence could not wipe the slate clean. The bondage had to be paid in full. One afternoon, Garuda landed. He folded his bruised wings, planted his talons deep into the stone, and refused to move. The serpents snapped at his neck, demanding he take flight. Refusing to yield, he stared down at the shifting mass of scales and asked a single question. "What is the ransom? What must I bring you to wipe this debt clean?" The serpents laughed. They looked at the giant, exhausted bird and decided to ask for the one thing in the universe that could not be bought, traded, or won. "Bring us the Amrita," they hissed. "Bring us the nectar of immortality." It was a death sentence disguised as a price. The Amrita was held in the highest vaults of heaven. It was the sole authority over the gods' supremacy, the sacred liquid that kept them from rotting. They guarded it with forces that could vaporize continents. The serpents knew Garuda would die trying to reach it, and his mother would remain their property forever. Garuda did not argue. He simply turned his face toward heaven, crouched low to the earth, and pushed off. The sheer concussive force of his launch snapped the trunks of thousand-year-old trees, flattening the forest into dust. Up in the golden halls, the alarms of heaven sounded. The celestial ramparts had stood untouched since the dawn of creation, bathed in pure, unblemished light. Now the gods looked down and saw a shadow rushing toward them, blotting out the sun. The celestial vanguard, the Adityas and the Vasas, assembled at the gates. These were warrior gods, beings who had slaughtered demon armies for centuries. They drew their glowing weapons, raising a forest of celestial spears and blazing arrows, preparing to execute the invader. As Garuda breached the atmosphere, the gods unleashed a devastating volley. Thousands of divine projectiles struck the great bird in a blinding flash of light, but the smoke cleared, and Garuda had not fallen. The weapons of heaven shattered harmlessly against his golden feathers. He did not even slow down. He beat his wings with such catastrophic force that the resulting hurricane scattered the immortal army like dry leaves. Gods were thrown against the walls of heaven, their armor dented, their weapons torn from their hands by the sheer crushing pressure of the wind. Indra, the king of heaven, watched his invincible vanguard collapse in seconds. He immediately deployed the next defense. A wall of divine fire erupted across the sky, burning so fiercely it consumed the air itself. The heat was meant to turn any mortal flesh to ash before it even touched the flames. The sheer temperature of the inferno began to melt the golden gates of heaven. Streams of molten slag ran down the celestial steps like water. Garuda did not retreat from the blistering heat. He opened his massive beak and inhaled the water of a dozen earthly rivers, pulling the churning currents deep into his chest. He spat a deluge of boiling steam and water that slammed into the celestial flames, drowning the fire in a violent hiss of thick gray smoke. He tore through the blinding ash and finally reached the vault. But the final defense was waiting. It was a spinning wheel of razor-sharp blades, moving so fast it looked like a solid disk of blinding light. It was designed to shred any living tissue into red mist. Brute force would only result in amputation. Garuda could not break it. So, he shrank. He condensed his colossal form down to the size of a sparrow and dove straight into the impossible, razor-thin spaces between the spinning blades. The metal caught him. The blade sliced across his chest and tore through his wings. He bled across the iron, but he refused to stop. He slipped through the grinding mechanism and reformed his massive bleeding body on the other side. He was inside the vault. The Amrita rested on an altar, a liquid so pure it seemed to burn without heat, holding the sole authority over eternal life. He took it in his bleeding talons. The theft was absolute. The sky had been broken. But as he turned to leave, he found Indra standing before him. The king of heaven stood blocking the exit. He raised the Vajra, the terrifying thunderbolt that had shattered mountains. The air in the vault tasted heavily of ozone and copper. Garuda did not flinch. He tightened his grip on the golden pot. The tension froze the room. One strike of the Vajra would tear the vault apart and leave them both dead in the ashes. Indra saw the raw power of the beast. He saw the blood dripping from Garuda's chest and the ruined gates outside. He realized a war in this small room would destroy heaven entirely. They stood in the ruin of the vault and forged a bitter, silent pact. Indra needed the Amrita to stay in heaven. Garuda needed it to fulfill an oath on earth. Garuda would deliver the pot. The ransom would be stamped. Then, it would be Indra's problem to steal it back. Garuda plummeted back to earth. The wind tore at his fresh wounds, but he did not slow down. He landed violently before the serpents, the impact shaking their nests and cracking the stone. He carefully placed the glowing pot onto a bed of sharp green kusha grass. "The ransom is paid," Garuda declared. His voice was like grinding stone. "My mother is free." The serpents stared at the Amrita. They were too frantic for the prize to question how the bird had survived. They hissed their consent. In that exact moment, the invisible weight that had crushed Vinata for decades shattered. She did not cheer. She simply fell forward into the dust, weeping, before slowly pushing herself up on her hands and knees. She stood, trembling, brushing the dirt from her skin. She looked at her son. She was no longer a footstool. She was a mother. The binding oath dissolved into the wind. The serpents lunged toward the pot, desperate to drink the immortality they had demanded from the sky. Garuda raised a single, heavy talon, blocking their path. "You are about to drink the holiest substance in creation," he said softly. "Divine law requires you to cleanse yourselves first. Go to the river, bathe, then claim your prize." The serpents, terrified of angering the universe and losing their ultimate reward just inches from the finish line, halted. They slithered away to the river to perform their purification rituals. The moment their scales touched the water, the sky flashed. Indra plunged from the clouds, snatched the pot of Amrita from the grass, and vanished back into the heavens without a sound. When the serpents returned from the water, the altar was empty. Only the bed of kusha grass remained, sticky with a few lingering drops of the divine nectar. Panicked and cheated, the serpents threw themselves onto the grass. They flicked their tongues frantically over the sharp blades, desperate to lick up the residue of immortality before it dried. The grass did not yield nectar. It yielded consequence. The razor-sharp edges sliced through their tongues, splitting them straight down the middle. Look closely at a serpent today. The forked tongue is not an accident of nature. It is the permanent, physical scar of their ancestors' greed. It is the residue of the day they tried to extort a mother and got mutilated for their arrogance. Garuda took Venata and flew into the vast open sky. He had broken the ancient laws of the heavens. The universe now understood that unimaginable physical force could rewrite the rules of creation. But physical force has a limit. You can batter the golden gates of heaven with muscle and blood, but you cannot conquer the mind of a man. In the next myth, we leave the sky and return to the dirt. A king with an invincible army is about to learn that all the weapons in the world are utterly useless against a sage who has learned how to sit in perfect silence. The era of physical monsters is ending. The fire of Tapasya is igniting. If you want to witness the exact moment a king's pride is crushed without a single blade being drawn, subscribe to Mythkipedia. We will see you in the ashes.